ladies and gentlemen. Our speaker today is Nelson McCausland. Politician, I think is the term.
Retired.
Retired politician. like the rest of us, retired from public service. And Nelson, you have the floor.
Thanks very much indeed. Thanks indeed for the invitation along this morning, and it's good to be with you. I had thought of speaking about something cultural, historical. Well, it will be historical, but it's not a cultural talk this morning. I gather you'll be looking at the Northern Ireland Protocol sometime soon, and I thought it would be useful maybe just to look back at the story of the European Union and how it came that we are or were where we were. Because I say history, but most of us here will be able to remember back to 1975 and to the referendum on joining the European Union. And at that stage I was 24, I was interested in politics, and I got involved in that campaign at that time. I kept some of the literature, and I was looking back at it recently. And so when people say that if you're opposed to Britain being in the European Union, if you support the idea of Brexit, then you're doing it because you're a little Englander or some other mad reason, which is just not true. And I want to just look this morning at some of the reasons why some of us are in favour of being outside the European Union. Now, I'm not dealing with the issue about the protocol or the anomalous position of Northern Ireland at the moment as a result of the protocol, but just with the story of how we get from the years immediately after the Second World War right through to the present time, because the roots of the European Union really lie in the days immediately after and thereabouts at the end of the Second World War. I'll put up at the top there a title, call it United States of Europe. It calls itself the European Union. But what I want to show is that if you look carefully at the narrative, it soon becomes clear that that ultimately is the vision of the people who are driving it, the people at the heart of it. Their vision is a United States of Europe, a sort of federal Europe, a bit like the United States of America, where, yes, individual states in America have certain powers, they have an identity. You can be a Californian, a Texan, whatever, but you're also part of the United States of America. And in the same way, these folk have a vision whereby, yes, you could be British, Irish, French, German, whatever, but you would also be part of that United States of Europe. I'm going down here a couple of slides to number 3. If you go with that one, thank you. I'm missing out some because some of them are ones that this was really designed for another talk. A lot of what happens in the world, I think, happens behind closed doors. Someone years ago said it's a bit like looking at a clock. You can see the hands moving, but it's what's going on behind the face of the clock. All the little gears and wheels and all the rest, the batteries or whatever, that's where it's really all happening, but you don't see that. All you ever see is the hands of the clock going round, or not, as the case might be. And I think what has happened over the years is that for many people, the focus was on the surface, the face of the clock, rather than what was going on behind closed doors. And so, next slide there takes us back to the setting up in 1946. That's 1 year after the war. Europe had seen a devastating war, bloodshed on a scale that's unimaginable. It had seen terrible turmoil, cities wasted to the ground, so many millions of people killed, and there was a desire to do something about it. And there was talk of how you would deal with all of these national divisions in Europe. France, in particular, as one of the big powers, and Germany. And at that time, some people came up with the concept of a United States of Europe. Now, a United Europe wasn't there for the first time. Been talking about. Go back to Napoleon. Napoleon was trying to do the same thing in his day. There were lots of people who had a go at that. If Hitler did his way, he would have had a united Europe because he would have dominated and controlled it. So the idea of uniting Europe wasn't new. But in 1946, after the war, a Union of European Federalists was set up. It was a non-governmental organisation, and its campaign was to create a federal Europe, to bring all the countries together and therefore put an end to war. No more wars in Europe because we would all be, or mainland Europe would all be one country. In fact, Winston Churchill supported that idea. But his point was there should be a United States of Europe, but over there, Britain would not be part of it. It would be friendly with them, be a good neighbour, but it was a United States of Europe that did not include the United Kingdom. The Union of European Federalists was set up, was founded in Paris by organisations from 16 countries in December 1946. The president was a Liberal Democrat MEP, Andrew Duff. Andrew Duff was a Liberal Democrat, was president from 2008 to 2013. My point in saying that was that it's an idea that has had strong support in some political parties more than others. So we'll see later on, within the Labour Party, there was a lot of division and friction about it and arguments. Within the Conservative Party, there were a lot of different opinions and arguments about it. But those on what I would term the liberal left there, the Liberal Democrats, for example, were very favourable towards a federal Europe. And it has always been the end goal of the European project. Back in 1975, we were told, look, you're only joining a common market. It's just like being good neighbours, and we'll sell them goods and we'll buy from them, and it'll be good for trade, and it'll create jobs, and there'll be more jobs in the north of England, there'll be more jobs here, there. It's going to be good for trade. But the reality was very different. That's not what it was about. That was in 1946, and then in 1947 another meeting there was held, this time in Paris, on the 17th of July 1947 to set up something called the European Movement, which still exists today. And it's one of those organisations that nobody really knows much about, most people have never heard of, but it's driving that idea of a United States of Europe. I'm not going to go through that next slide, but what it's about is the difference between two different approaches to Europe. There is one that says ideologically, on principle, I think there should be this United States of Europe. We should all get together and be one country. Maybe within individual states, but one country. And then there are others who say it's not an ideological thing, it's not pardon me. It's not something that's ideological as such, it's practical. It's about business, it's about trade. And when they were trying to sell the idea, there were those at the heart of it who really believed, ideologically, I think we should have the United States of Europe. There were others who said, we'll sell it as the common market. It's about jobs, good thing, money, investment, money in your pocket, better standard of living, better house, get all these things. We'll sell it to people that way because that's going to be more appealing. People will be interested in that, they'll like that. And so there were two different approaches, but the common aim was there for all of them. If you go to France, one of the key figures in setting up the United States of Europe and developing this European project was a French statesman called Robert Schuman. And outside his house there are today 4 statues. One was the Prime Minister of Italy, one was Robert Schuman, one was a French political economist, Jean Monnet, and the other was the Chancellor of Germany, Konrad Adenauer. If you think about that, Italian, French, German. Wasn't the little countries like Belgium and the Netherlands. It was the big powers as they saw it. Remember, France, key player in the war. Germany, the key player on that side in the war. And Italy with Mussolini there as well. So the countries that had been heavily involved in the war on mainland Europe, they were the ones very much driving this concept. And in a sense, that those four statues are a homage to the founding fathers of Europe. If you think back, probably not remember most of those, 3 out of the 4 probably forgotten to most people, but Konrad Adenauer was certainly one name that sticks in my mind from those days as the Chancellor of Germany from 1949 to 63, so a long period. I mentioned there that was outside Robert Schumann's house. 1950, they produced something called the Schuman Declaration. Europe will not be made all at once or according to a single plan. It will be built through concrete achievements which first create a de facto solidarity. Then he says, the coming together of the nations of Europe requires the elimination of the age-old opposition of France and Germany. Schuman was obviously devoted to this politically. For him also it was quite a religious project. He was a very devout Catholic, had been honoured by the papacy and so on. And for him there was a religious dimension to it. And quite a number of these people talk about that, about building again a Catholic Europe. So that was their concept at that time back, 1946 to 1950. The coming together of the nations of Europe requires the elimination of opposition. 1950. The following year, the Treaty of Paris, and they set up something called the European Coal and Steel Community. It's all about coal and steel and jobs, business, investment. It's all about money. France, Western Germany, Italy, and Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg established the European Coal and Steel Community. Now it sounds perfectly innocuous. It's about coal. It's about steel. But it was about countries coming together on a united basis. And it was the first building block of the European Union. The European Declaration was signed on the same day by all the leaders present. And it declared that the treaty had given birth to Europe. Now, Europe had always been there. Well, for thousands and thousands and thousands of years it had been there. There had been a Europe. But here was something saying, we are coming together as countries and this is the birth of Europe. It was setting out this principle of a new democratic organisation of Europe. Funny enough, France weren't overly happy with this, and the concept was opposed by Charles de Gaulle. But nevertheless, 1951, 70 years ago this year, the Treaty of Paris and the Declaration, we are giving birth to Europe. 6 years later, they signed the Treaty of Rome, 1957. There were 6 countries: West Germany, Italy, France, Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg. The same countries, 6 countries. And they formed the European Economic Community. Interestingly enough, in 1992, they dropped the word economic. It wasn't economic. That was just window dressing. That was camouflage. European Economic Community suddenly transformed in 1992 into the European Union. It became the European Union eventually there in 2009 with the Lisbon Treaty. So European Economic Community, European Community, European Union. So this concept of constantly changing to emphasize this idea that it's about uniting countries. Then you come to one of the politicians that would be on my list of people that I have a low regard for. Since there's a camera on, I'll word it that way. People I would have a low regard for. That was Edward Heath. Now we think about Edward Heath here in Northern Ireland, particularly in terms of the abolition of Stormont, the end of our devolved government at Stormont, and he is held very much to blame for that by people within the unionist community. But he is the one who really made the move to bring the United Kingdom into the European Union. If we're going to lay the blame at anybody's door, assuming you think it is blame, that's a personal view, if we're going to put the responsibility, or as some might say culpability, on anybody, it would be Edward Heath. And I say that for a couple of reasons. Remember, it wasn't the first time that the United Kingdom had sought to join the European Union. The idea had been sold, first of all, at the time of Harold Mcmillan. Back in 1961, when Harold Mcmillan was Prime Minister, the United Kingdom first applied to join the European Union. They were turned down. Europe didn't want them at that time. It was vetoed, in fact, at that time. Charles de Gaulle didn't like the British, and he vetoed it in 1963. There was another attempt in 1967, at the time when Harold Wilson was Prime Minister. So Harold doesn't get off lightly either. There was another attempt in 1967, and again France vetoed it. But eventually in 1969, negotiations got underway. There was a commitment to them, and the negotiations really started in 1970. So we're talking 50 years ago, negotiations starting. And those negotiations were completed when Britain joined the European Community on the 1st of January 1973, along with two other countries. Which other two countries joined the same day? Republic of Ireland was one, and the other was Denmark. Denmark joined on the same day, but the significant thing was that Ireland joined in 73 as well, the Irish Republic. Eventually that was put to a referendum here in 1975. And on the 5th of June 1975, there was a referendum across the United Kingdom. 67% of people, 2/3, wanted to be part of this European community project, and 1/3 didn't. It was a 2-to-1 split. Here in Northern Ireland it was a bit closer, but across the United Kingdom it was 2-to-1. Parties, as I said earlier, were very deeply divided by it. And if I was to ask you today, which parties in Northern Ireland opposed being in the European Union? Which? Any guesses? Sinn Féin? No, they were for it.
DUP.
The DUP were against the European Union. What about the UUP?
For.
They were generally for it. Now, I know some of the parties were totally unanimous, others were a bit splintered. But when you look at it, you had nationalism here and republicanism in terms of the Workers' Party, the officials and the provisionals were strenuously opposed to being in Europe. It's exactly different from where they are today. Now the Workers' Party I think are still against the European Union. But, and that's for socialist reasons. They believe that it's a unit, an organisation for big business to exploit workers. That's how they would look at it. Gives power to the bosses. But it's the position of Sinn Féin, original Sinn Féin, that's the most significant, because they did an about-face completely. The SDLP position is interesting, because you had two big figures in the SDLP. You had John Hume, but you also had Gerry Fitt. And the time that there was a vote at Westminster on Europe, Gerry Fitt voted against it. John Hume was passionately for it. I'll take Gerry Fitt's case first. Peter Shore and others on the left wing of the Labour Party were in the same position as socialists here, a lot of the Workers' Party and so on. They took the view that this was bad for the worker. It would result in lower standards of living, it would poor conditions for workers, all sorts of reasons. But the left wing of the Labour Party, Peter Shore and people like that, they campaigned strongly against it. You also had people in the Labour Party who were very much for it. And against it also you had then Gerry Fitt. Gerry Fitt's view was similar to Peter Shore. He looked at it as a socialist. Because in his own simple way, he was that. John Hume looked at it in a very different way. John Hume was a long-term thinker. John Hume was not a short-term thinker. And even before all of this, Hume was pushing the idea of the European Union being the panacea for Ireland. He believed that if the United Kingdom joined the European Union and the Irish Republic joined the European Union, it would inevitably lead to a United States of Europe and, in effect, a United Ireland. It would dissolve differences, it would harmonise across the border, it would dissolve the border, and he saw it as the way of uniting Ireland. Long before this, back in the early 60s, he was thinking that way. He was a long-term thinker. He was much better educated than many of the other people in the SDLP, and that was his vision. So he pushed the SDLP in that direction, and we'll come to the vote then for the European Parliament in a moment, but he was pushing that. But there were those still on the more socialist side who took a different view, but he was the dominant voice within the party at that time. If you remember, I came up with that. Edward Heath had signed the Treaty of Accession before a referendum. He had signed it on 22nd of January 72, and Reverend Robert Bradford, who was the MP for South Belfast, said he was passionately opposed to the European Union. So they were divided on the issue. You had people like John Taylor who were passionately European. John Taylor was passionate about being a member of he was involved with the European movement. Robert Bradford took a very different view. When we signed the Treaty of Accession, he said, I was in Dublin, and I did what I often do when I'm depressed. I go to church, and I went into an Anglican church and lifted the 1662 prayer book and read the prayer for the day. And it was, I will annul your covenant with death. Your agreement with hell shall not stand, says God. What a word. I felt almost like saying hallelujah. So his view was, we'll join, but someday we'll leave. He died some years after that, nearly a decade after that. But ultimately he was right. Britain has left the European Union. Just leave it, actually I'll just go back for a moment there to that, leave it there. Back to Heath for a minute. The elections to the European Parliament were then held in June 1979. And it's funny when you look back, there were 11 candidates for 3 seats. The number of the parties, interesting. Sinn Féin were not standing, obviously. But Paisley came first with 29.8% of the vote. The UUP were confident they were going to do really well, and they thought they could take 2 seats. So they ran 2 candidates. They ran John Taylor and Harry West. Between them, the 2 of them got 21%, 22% of the vote. So you had Paisley on 29%, almost 30%, 29.8%. John Hume on 25%, and the Ulster Union is 22. Now, interesting, 52, 30 and 22 was 52. There was also Jim Kilfetter. He ran as an independent unionist, and he got 6.7%. And there was also a candidate for the Unionist Party of Northern Ireland, which is a minor thing, 0.6%. But what you're seeing there is the sizable vote for unionism at that time collectively, but very much divided. Bernadette Devlin, she got 6%, and the rest got negligible votes. So out of that, you had in the end the three larger parties, DUP, the UUP, and the SDLP, 1 seat each. Back to the European Union. One of the people who cropped up a lot during the Brexit discussions and debates was Guy Verhofstadt, who's an MEP from Belgium, leader of the group of the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for Europe and chief Brexit representative of the European Parliament, and someone who is really, really passionate about creating a united Europe. And he was very influential, I think, within the European project at that period. In 2005, he wrote a book in Dutch with the title Verenigde. It's called in English United States of Europe. It hasn't been translated into English, I don't think. I've never seen a copy of it, but it means United States of Europe. And so back in 2005, while some people will deny it, the ultimate aim of Guy Verhofstadt and others is to take sovereignty away from Britain and all the other countries and create a United States. I spoke earlier about Edward Heath. And Edward Heath was very, like many politicians, good with words. He could say something and give you an impression, but it wasn't really what he was thinking. And Edward Heath was asked time and time again, if we join this European community, will there be a loss of sovereignty? No, you're getting worked up about things. No. There will be no loss of essential sovereignty. Now, if you think about it, there's a difference between saying no loss of sovereignty and no loss of essential sovereignty. The answer to it all came from Lord Denning, who was one of the most brilliant judges that law lords that Britain has ever had. Remarkable man, a great man. And Lord Denning said very clearly in one of his rulings, there is a loss of sovereignty. You are giving up sovereignty to the European community. So you've got the judge, you're giving up sovereignty, Edward Heath. You're not losing any essential sovereignty. Who's going to decide what's essential? By the use of that word essential, he conned an awful lot of people. And that was crucial because politicians across the board were saying, if we join this, we will lose sovereignty. He was trying to give the impression you wouldn't. The truth of the matter is, Verhofstadt and others are very much set on bringing sovereignty centrally into the European Union. There's another one from Luxembourg, an MEP, former European Commissioner for Justice, Fundamental Rights and Citizenship. Upon mature reflection, I think the term United States of Europe best reflects the ultimate destination of the European Union. Now, you couldn't get a clearer statement than that. This is not just about a European Union, it's a United States of Europe on the model of the United States of America. And you can see in America how the power has, over the decades, moved more and more from the individual states to the central power in Washington. It would be the same with the United States of Europe. In 2017, Martin Schulz, leader of the German Social Democratic Party and former president of the European Parliament, I want a new constitutional treaty to establish the United States of Europe. And it would include a convention that includes civil society and the people. And that was at the point where he was trying to enter coalition talks with Angela Merkel. She rejected this call. But what he was doing was setting out his vision. So whether it's Verhofstadt, any other leader, Martin Schulz, whoever it be, those at the heart of it, that is their vision. Not all of them come at it from the same view, the same way. Spinelli there, the Italian communist, was a European federalist, one of the founding fathers, and the author of For a Free and United Europe. So there were those who were on the more right-wing side of politics, those who were on the communist side, but their common vision of those involved in the European project was a United States of Europe. And he makes an interesting statement in something he wrote in 1972. He says, "A true European government in the fullest sense of the word will not exist until the day when the community, now the European Union, also possesses the power of coercion." The power of coercion over anybody who does not wish to obey its laws. That's not the language of agreement. That's not the language of the good neighbour. That's not the language of deals about coal and steel and better business. That's the language of centralised power, autocratic power at the centre of the United States of Europe that these folk are aiming for. And his name is over the building in the European Parliament there in Brussels in Belgium. You can see his name over the door. In his view, we've got to be in a position to coerce people. When you see bullying from Europe, coercion, that's how those folk think. There's a lack of respect for the individual, for the smaller group, the smaller community. It's about centralised power and dictatorship. I'm jumping back then to 1948. 750 delegates from across Europe met in The Hague with observers from the USA and Canada. It was organised by the International Committee of the Movements for European Unity. And you had there people like Winston Churchill, and other people from Britain included Harold Mcmillan. So when I say Harold Mcmillan was interested in this back in the 60s, we should not imagine that the Conservative Party is a party of British sovereignty. Harold Mcmillan was quite happy to hand away British sovereignty. He was there in 1948. Bertrand Russell and Hugh de Largy was another MP of that era. So this is something that doesn't break down neatly with parties. And if you look at the Labour Party recent Brexit thing, you had Kate Hoey going one way, and if Corbyn had been able to say what he really thought, he would have gone the same way, because that's his view. And you had Keir Starmer. So parties are divided. We saw that also when we saw how Parliament at Westminster could never agree on anything, because you had factions here and factions there, and they were so splintered, it's impossible to almost get anything through Parliament. Emmanuel Macron, bring it up to the present, speaking of the Sorbonne in 2017, called for a sovereign, back to sovereignty, a sovereign united Europe. Creating a sense of belonging will be the strongest cement for Europe. We need to make the Eurozone the heart of Europe's global economic power. At this moment, I am thinking of Robert Schuman, who dared to propose building Europe in Paris in 1950. Two things strike me about that. It's strange that in 2017 he's still talking about the Euro and the Eurozone, global economic power. Thank goodness Britain never joined the Euro. Our economy would have been destroyed if we had. But it's interesting that he talks about a sovereign united Europe, creating a sense of belonging. Notice how during the Olympics there was talk again of really it's not that Britain did so well. If we add together all the countries in the European Union and see it as a European Union team, because they want to have a day when it's not French team in the Olympics, not a German team. It's no different from America. The states in America don't enter teams in the Olympics. It's the United States of America. And they want to see a day when, sense of belonging, people will be out cheering for the European football team or whatever it is in the Olympics. A sense of belonging. You get it also, I think, with how the whole European system worked in terms of Northern Ireland. I often thought it strange because when I was in Stormont, you were going around from time to time opening buildings, and a number of them had a plaque up that had on it partly funded by the European Union. Partly funded by the European Union. As though somehow we should be grateful because they gave us some money. The truth of the matter is, it's our money they're giving back to us. I can never think of any other organisation where you would join it, pay to join, get back some of your money and be expected to be grateful. Anybody who negotiates a deal like that is daft. We always got back less than we put in. But it was to make people feel grateful. And that was part of the Brexit argument. If we don't have our membership in the European Union, certain monies will dry up and I'll be out of a job or we'll not get a grant or whatever. Britain has always been putting in more than it's got out. And that will become more of an issue in the Irish Republic as well in days to come. Because up to now, Irish Republic has done well. I always used to laugh. I used to get down to the south quite a bit in the 1980s in connection with my work. And I always used to laugh because when you crossed the border and went into Cavan, there were no potholes because it was just one big pothole. Every road in Cavan that you went down from the border seemed to be full of potholes. Not anymore. European funding has really improved the infrastructure. You look at the motorways, the investment. Those days are over. It's changing. You're going to see much more of a concern down there in terms of them paying in. European announces plan to scrap member state veto on tax policy. The idea being, if they dictate, individual country may not like it, but nobody's got a veto, we can do it. European army plans kept secret from voters. The idea of a United States of Europe with its own army. When you've got a flag, and they're looking to create a single president, not two presidents at present. Single president, parliament, flag, army. If it walks like a duck, sounds like a duck, it probably is a duck. And if it walks like a country, and sounds like a country, and acts like a country, it is a country. And that is their aim, United States of Europe. One of the other aspects of it all is that there's a tremendous amount of duplicity within it all. Richard Brooks, the author of The Great Tax Robbery, tells me, this is a quote from The Guardian, so it must be true. Richard Brooks, the author, tells me Luxembourg is a far greater menace than the Caribbean laundromats. You know those islands that are tax havens where you can stash your money or you can base your company so you don't have to pay tax. And people invest in those countries, or put their headquarters rather in those countries, because it's a way of avoiding capital gains tax or some other tax, and you can make a lot of money out of it, and there's an awful lot of crookery and hookery involved. But he says Luxembourg is a far greater menace than them because it benefits from the European Union's free movement of capital, whilst the Cayman Islands or whatever, where Billy Drummond has all his money, cannot. More dangerously, it inspires the Netherlands, Ireland and other EU states to follow that beggar thy neighbour tax policy, to join it in a race to the bottom. Remember those discussions not so long ago about creating a minimum tax rate for these big companies like Google and Amazon that operate in so many different countries, and you can never track whether they're meant to pay tax because they can move money around by the click on a mouse and they move billions of pounds or dollars or whatever it is around. Those sort of companies make great use of that. And that's why in some countries they're paying virtually no tax. But then there are countries in the European Union that are operating that sort of a system. And one of the countries that is vehemently opposed to this idea of a minimum tax rate for these multinational companies is the Irish Republic. Because if you're looking for the company in the world that has the biggest share and impact on the Irish Republic's economy, it's Apple. Apple makes a big contributor down there. The only reason they're based in the Republic is sweetheart deal on taxes. And the Republic's worried that if everybody's given a level playing field, leveled up, why would you go there than somewhere else? They're worried about that. There's already been one tax case that they got out of the Republic because I think the European Union was looking favourably on them because of their role in the Brexit issue. But what you're seeing there is, at the end of the day, countries are selfish. And we have, I think, and the United Kingdom has operated the rules very honestly and fairly down through the years, much more so than almost any other country in Europe. France, no on the wink about things. Germany, no on the wink. Italy, everything goes. Spain, and the United Kingdom, the courts, everything went by the book. I'm just moving on here. Moving on to what is happening in European politics today. What we're starting to see, I think, is something of a shift in the political landscape across Europe. And it's marked there, its defining feature, that article says at the end, is radical volatility. We have our problems in the UK, but our governments are reasonably stable. They tend to last. If you look across Europe, places like Italy, look at Greece, look at the combinations of governments from some of the stuff that was happening, I don't know if I had it up there, in Italy, from the far right to the far left. The League of the North, the Five Star Movement, all these political parties, miles apart. And we know in Northern Ireland what it's like trying to run a coalition of parties that are vastly different. It's an almost impossible situation. But we're seeing shifts to the right. The growing power of the National Front in France, shifts to the right in other countries there in Eastern Europe. It is quite volatile. And one of the things that struck me during the whole Brexit debate was the point that was often thrown up. If you left the European Union, you don't know what the future holds. That's true. But the corollary to that is, you stay in the European Union, you don't know what the future holds. Other than the fact that they're moving towards greater integration, harmonisation and unification. The fear in Europe, the reason why they fought so much was spelled out very clearly by Donald Tusk, 2016. As a historian, I fear Brexit could be the beginning of the destruction of not only the European Union, but also Western political civilization in its entirety. I think that's a bit overblown, but I think their fear, Tusk's admitting it there, is if you start down that road, Britain leaves, in time others will follow. I forgot that was that. Yeah, if you look there, just that was the Italian Parliament there, the Populist Party, the Five Star Movement, the League of the North. Those parties, those are the democratic parties and allies, free and equal, brothers of Italy, and so on. How you ever form coalitions out of those parties, I don't know. The campaign to stay in I'm coming towards the end here, and there's some time. Yeah. There was a lot of dishonesty during the campaign. I suspect dishonesty on both sides of the debate. People say things and they exaggerate them, or they paint them in the best light possible. But I was struck by the case that was made again and again. Oh, there's dark money coming in on behalf of Brexit. There are people putting big money in there, dark money. We don't know where it's coming from. And there were people running to the Supreme Court in London to try and get things investigated. All sorts of things were checked out, and yes, there was money going into the campaign to leave. But I was interested also in the money that was going into the campaign to stay. And it did highlight the role of a thing called Open Society Foundations, founded in 1993 by George Soros, one of the wealthiest men in the world. He was able to give away 32 billion and still keep 8 billion. If you've got 40 billion, I can't even visualize, a million. It's hard to, if someone puts it down, it's hard to visualize it. You can visualize 500 quid for something, or £10,000 for a car, whatever a car costs. You visualize those sort of figures. But visualizing a million, never mind a billion, and then $40 billion is there that he has. He gave away 32 billion because he's quite an elderly man now. He made his money out of killings on the stock exchange. Other people's losses were his gains. And he supports all sorts of causes around the world with this 32 billion that went to Open Society Foundations. And half a million went to groups opposing Brexit, including 182,000 to the European movement. And with that money, what they were able to do was then fund. And it's something that he has done with a whole lot of other causes around the world, what would be seen as socially liberal causes. They were able to fund a myriad of little organizations. It's a typical ploy of the left. Unionism tends to want to consolidate. We should be united. The left tends to operate in the base of form a whole lot of different wee groups, and people will think there's an awful lot of people behind it, but it's actually the same people behind all of them. And I think a gentleman there, Femi Olawale, I think is his name. Those who have to live with Brexit don't want to. He popped up everywhere. He popped up at Stormont one day with a bus, and had a big sign on it about young people, because he was the voice of British young people against Brexit. And Femi, who has very good education, very well educated here and in America, I think as well, worked in the European Union, very articulate, very able debater. He was there with the bus. They had about 10 people on the bus. They had about 6 people join them. They got a picture, it was all over the papers. And the message was, young people of Britain are against European exit. 16 people on a bus. You'd do better here filling a minibus with people in the room here. There's more people. But it got a headline, it was well organised, well orchestrated. And that's where Soros's money went. Not into convincing people, but into trying to bully people that really, if you are young, you should be for the European Union. He's now given up on that, and he appears regularly on chat shows and so on television later on at night, debating various issues and making a good living still out of it all. I had at the beginning, United States of Europe, I put the thing up at the end saying, I'm British, get me out of here. Now that was put up before the Brexit vote. Here in Northern Ireland, we're not fully out. Hence the Northern Ireland Protocol that somebody's going to come and speak to you about. And that disappoints and saddens me. Because we joined all those years ago, 50 years ago, as one United Kingdom. We should be leaving as one United Kingdom. We would have been wrong all those years ago to trust Edward Heath. Many of us were foolish enough in younger days to probably try and trust Harold Mcmillan. My trust in high-level politics is pretty low, because you're promised much, what you get is very different. And particularly those things that will be over my dead body, says Boris Johnson. Yes. It certainly wasn't. And that was a betrayal. Not the first time Northern Ireland's been betrayed, but certainly one of the more recent. Why should we have left? Because it was going to become the United States of Europe. That's still the aim. Will they succeed? I think they will achieve greater integration, but I think also ultimately it will collapse. I don't think it will last indefinitely. And I'm certainly not going to prophesy anything beyond that, because I'm not a prophet. I'll stop there. Thank you.